Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started. My name's Steve Kenzie. I'm the Executive Director of the UN Global Compact. Welcome to our session today, Making Money Matter, Sustainable Pensions on the Path to a Better World. This is the penultimate session in our climate forum that we've been putting on this week, and we're absolutely delighted to be partnering with Make My Money Matter to discuss this really important issue and opportunity where we can all really make a difference, both as individuals and through our companies. A bit of housekeeping. This is a webinar, and so that means you, our audience, will be muted throughout and no video for you. But we really do want to hear from you, and so I urge you to put your questions into the Q&A box as we go along, and we're going to have a good session at the end where we will seek to get through all of the questions that you've posted. If you do post a question, you will see that there's a little thumbs up symbol at each question. And if you didn't post that question, but you wish you had, or you thought it's something you'd really like to hear the answer to, do please give it a thumbs up, and that will shift it up to the top of the list and increase the likelihood that we will answer that question. If you have a question for the panelists on a more technical matter, then we would urge you to put that into the chat box. But please do try to put the questions you want us to answer into the Q&A. It just makes it much easier for us to manage. I think that's all of the housekeeping. So we're going to hear a lot about Make My Money Matter once we get stuck in. So I'm going to just take a moment to tell you a little bit about Global Compact, really briefly. And apologies to those of you that have been on other sessions this week and heard this before. Global Compact is the UN Corporate Sustainability Initiative. We are built out from 10 principles that were drawn from UN treaties in the areas of human rights, labor standards, environment, and anti-corruption. And it is a really useful framework for companies that want to be good corporate citizens. We have a network here in the UK where we offer programming to support organizations that have made that commitment, and we'd be very happy to work with you. So do please get in touch. And now to the point of today. We've got fantastic speakers. First, I'm going to, the speakers, Richard Curtis, barely needs an introduction, filmmaker, and the co-founder of Make My Money Matter and Project Everyone, having a huge impact on this agenda and a real change maker. We've got Tony Burdon, the CEO of Make My Money Matter, and I suppose really we'd all freely admit our pensions expert on the panel today, Emma Douglas, the head of defined contributions at Legal & General Investment Management. So we've got a great program for you. And I think why, I want to just say a word on why this is so important to me. The whole point of pensions from a financial perspective, we're saving money to make our future better, so that you have something set aside for when you retire. And if we just keep it such a narrow view of pensions, we're really missing probably the most important aspect. If our pension fund then takes our money and invests it in companies that are making the world unlivable, what's the point of it? You've made yourself, you think you're making yourself more comfortable, but you're creating a future that is not the one that we want to live in. And so the essence of why we should care about sustainable pensions is pretty obvious. As an individual, as a company, we work with companies all the time that are setting net zero targets, science-based targets on emissions, aligning their activities with the Sustainable Development Goals. But too often, their pension fund is just this great blind spot, and oftentimes even undermining the good work that a company is doing in other areas. And this is something that's got to change. And all the credit in the world to Make My Money Matter for shining a big light on this and working with individuals, companies, and governments to bring about that change. So, without further ado, I'm delighted to turn over to Richard to give us a little bit more background on this fantastic project. Richard.
Hello. Very, very good to be here. I always love any meeting that has to do with business because I know my dad would be proud because he worked for Unilever all his life, I think 42 years or something like that. So let me just quickly introduce myself. I suspect I'm the least serious person in the meeting. And I always feel I should start by apologizing for some of those films that I've made, which include Mr. Bean and all the dodgy romantic comedies that made Hugh Grant so rich and so unhappy. But look, in the other side of my life, I've been trying to make amends. As you may know, I started the charity Comic Relief many years ago, which does Red Nose Day. And then I was part of organizing the Live 8 concerts and the Make Poverty History campaign. And most recently, I've been one of the Secretary General's advocates for the Sustainable Development Goals. And in some ways, this job has been the most surprising and exciting one. And amongst the UN folk I've dealt with, of course, the Global Compact are the best people, but I think it has the power to be the most important. At a recent meeting that we had, the Secretary General said that the greatest surprise to him of the global goals has been the way in that they've been taken up by the business community. He said that business was very often leading governments rather than the other way around. So it's a hugely important moment for me to be talking to you, because the world is a complex place. And by my reckoning, you in businesses committed to the goals are the necessary heroes who can turn the tide and really help achieve those goals. The fact that business is absolutely key to achieving the goals has come as a real surprise to me. When we did the Make Poverty History campaign, working with the G8 leaders, it was impossible to get meetings with business people at all. They thought that we were all card-carrying communists, but the landscape has so changed entirely. So my huge congratulations to all of you who are taking the SDGs seriously and are integrating them into all your plans and purposes. But today I would love to address this one particular thing, which, as Steve was saying, is the issue of pensions. Everything is important, the changes you make, and, to every part of your work, supply chains, the environment, gender equality, diversity, all your work to move your businesses to net zero. But there's just this particular thing about the power of pensions. The pensions are the most enormous pot of money. I think the world pension pot is 47 trillion. And if that money was applied to the SDGs, it would be completely transformative. When we started Red Nose Day, we passionately worked every day to raise millions. When we tried to influence the G8, it was billions, but pensions are trillions. So my very simple message to you is, as soon as you can, take a really serious look at your pensions. First, there is, as Steve said, the really simple thing of contradiction. In some way, the way I got interested in this first was watching an extraordinary TED talk by Dr. Bronwyn King, who's a cancer doctor, had her first meeting with her financial advisor and found out that 3 of the 6 things that her pension were most invested in were tobacco companies. So she'd actually been killing more people with cancer than she'd been saving. So, it is so important that your pensions aren't undermining all the other things you're doing for the SDGs. But this is so not only a divestment issue, it's the most positive idea that money could be flooding into businesses that are working for people and planet in new and exciting ways, and also profitably. This is such a key issue. When I first got interested in pensions and investment, I spoke to so many people, the governor of the Bank of England, teams at BlackRock and pension funds, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, just checking, is this in fact a kind of money losing scheme? And all of them confirmed that the why not moment was arriving. It is, no longer a question of morals versus money or value versus values. putting your pensions into sustainable and ethical funds is increasingly likely to make you more money, not less. And I remember Mark Carney talking to me about the changing nature of risk. And he said that companies that aren't looking to the SDGs are failing because they're failing to have a long-term plan. Companies that are revealed to be hypocritical in their actions are in far greater danger than, a company that just has a bad third quarter. And then, the very important thing that both employees and consumers are increasingly inspecting, that the businesses they work for will do the right thing, and the simplest right thing that you can do. Although, of course, it's complex, but that's what financial officers are for, is to make sure that you have a pension that's consistent with your values. So that's why we started this campaign called Make My Money Matter, asking for people to have pensions with intention, pensions we can be proud of. And it is moving much faster than we could have dreamt. This year alone, over 150 billion pounds worth of pensions will be moved in the UK to net zero. And we're partnering with people as diverse as the pension companies Nest and Aviva, and then British Telecom and BNP Paribas, as well as major NGOs like the World Wildlife Fund and Oxfam, and also even local governments in the UK, like Greater Manchester. And there are, in fact, sister campaigns springing up all over the world, from Australia, New Zealand, to the Netherlands, Sweden, and the USA. So look, you're going to hear a lot about this in the next hour, but can I just say three simple things? One, I think the public are coming. And that's one of the things we're trying to do every day now. As a result of our, very simple and direct campaigning, I'm getting messages from people who are changing their pensions. People are understanding that their financial footprint is as important as their carbon footprint. And all those people, especially the young, who, I don't know if you feel this, but I feel every day they're asking the question, what can I actually do to help the planet? Not which charity shall I support or which government, but in my actions. They're now seeing this as a wonderful new weapon in their armory for doing the right thing. So I truly believe that this is a popular movement, and soon it will be a demanded and expected action by all companies. Over half, apparently, of the 20 to 40-year-olds in the UK already say that they would switch their pensions if they knew that they would be invested in a way that would have positive impact on society and on the environment. My second point would just be to say to all of you, as an SDG advocate wearing my badge, thank you for your commitment and interest in the goals. They are a remarkable and remarkably detailed plan, which achieve, I think, particularly at the moment, this incredibly important job of pulling together all the areas where there's such popular passion: climate, poverty, justice, peace. And so, thank you very much for all your public leadership, and your endorsement of them actually strengthens them every day. And I wish that you would all talk about your commitment to the goals on every possible opportunity, even to the public. This is such a crucial 5 years. If the goals grow in power and fame, then the 5 years from 2025 to 2030, with the deadline approaching, could really lead to radical escalating change. But finally, back to the pensions, my message would be, why not now? Now's the time. Research in the UK shows that fewer than 10% of companies align their sustainable activities with their pensions. This so obviously can't be right. And I would really ask, as noble members of the Global Compact, that you put this on your to-do list straight away. Individuals will be doing it, but if all the companies at this meeting took action, it would be a really dramatic shift. So I would ask you just to make a mark in your diary, send a text or email to the person who handles pension in your company and say, this is something that we should talk about before Christmas. And then next year, you will be pouring money into great things that will make a huge difference to the world. So thank you very much for inviting me. Thank you for your work with the UN. My final tip, when I was young, I wrote a film called Love Actually, and I strongly advise you not to watch it this Christmas. Watch Elf, starring Will Ferrell. It's much funnier. And just to finish off, since I'm a sort of filmy person, here's a very short film that shows normal people's reactions to learning about the power of their pensions. This could be, as it were, your employees, and see how unhappy and then how happy this story makes them. So thank you again, and with luck, here comes our little film.
It actually never occurred to me before that my pension could be something that would create change.
So that's the dream, yeah. Tell me about it.
I would wonder why I hadn't been told about it already.
It doesn't sound like it can or should work.
I think most people don't know what their pension's investing in.
It'd be good to know more about the companies that my pension is being invested in, whether they're doing good in the world.
Who are they? Who are they run by? What are they doing? Where are they?
What? Invest in these?
You're reading it's like a list of horror. Making weapons and ammunition, it's a no-go.
Cigarette companies, coal mines, oil companies, gambling. No way.
I feel like something better could be done with my money. Oh, well, there you go. That is a stunning list of good things. If my pension went to these things, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Social housing, infrastructure like schools and hospital. I would definitely want my money to be invested in building wind farms, tackling climate change.
And companies that treat their workers well. This is my kind of list.
And I, as a kind of customer, can feel, first of all, better about where my money is going, but also you would assume that those pensions would do actually quite well, probably make more money ultimately.
Responsible investing is investing in companies which look after their workforce, look after the environment, and have a kind of a long-term sustainable view about the world and their company.
It would make me feel better in some small way that the things that I believe in, the things that I think are important and are important to me are being reflected in how my money is being used. I would probably go so far to say I would increase my pension contributions.
Yeah, I'm going to go make some calls and I'll leave here.
Now I'm going to run back home and check.
Understanding that the money could be working and obviously working to contribute to a better world. That's pretty amazing.
That was great. Thank you very much, Richard. Anyone with questions for Richard, please do start firing them into the Q&A box and we'll come to them after. But now we're going to pass on to Tony Burdon, the CEO of Make My Money Matter, to tell us what can we do, what's the campaign doing, and how can we get involved. Tony, over to you.
Great, thanks a lot, Stephen. And that's such a lovely film produced by one of our brilliant partners, Quiet Room. And Richard, of course, is a hard act to follow. It makes me feel a bit like Baldric in Blackadder, although I'm slightly better washed. Anyway, to get into a bit more detail. So, as Richard outlined, Make My Money Matter wants people to have more voice and choice around how their savings, their money is invested through banks, through their pensions, and to shift that finance, the trillions, into responsible and sustainable investment. So we've started the campaign in the UK first on pensions. The campaign's growing internationally, and our strategy is threefold. First is to mobilize pension savers to ask their pension provider or their employer, where is their pension invested? What's its impact? And whether their default fund, the main fund that they're in, can be more sustainable, but also to understand what other choices they might have. And then secondly, to ask employers, businesses like yourselves and others, to make their staff scheme more sustainable and join us as partners to put pressure on the industry to do more. Thirdly, to work with governments, regulators and industry to seek the changes that we need. And, by the way, I meet all of industry in lots of meetings and seminars and phone calls and so on. I've met fantastic people across the industry who support this agenda. And Emma, who will follow me from Legal and General, is one of those people. Lots of heroic people trying to move an industry that's just very difficult to move. We're asking for 5 things. Firstly, for pension funds to align their portfolios to net zero emissions by 2050, but with a halving by 2030. And it's this next decade that's so important to really drive the transition that's needed, but also to avoid that climate tipping point. Secondly, we want to grow the portion of pension fund portfolios that are invested for positive impact. Thirdly, to mainstream what's called ESG, environmental, social and governance, kind of descriptor for responsible investment. We want to mainstream that across the entire portfolio, not just to have pension funds investing in ESG funds, but to, and then invest in mainstream for the rest of the portfolio. And then for pension funds to become more active shareholders in the companies they invest in. And as shareholders, they can do the thing that Richard described, which is, help make these companies brilliant companies, to be shareholders of oil and gas companies, to help drive their transition to become lower emissions companies. And then finally, for pension funds to engage with their members and respond, where appropriate, to their values and their interests, while noting that, these pension savers are not investment experts. So as you all know, the climate and nature emergency creates huge risks to future returns to our pension funds, from the write-downs of BP's assets to Swiss Re reporting recently that 1/5 of countries are at risk of ecosystem collapse. So investing in creating solutions to these challenges helps to manage that risk, but also builds a better world. And as Richard described, there are also good returns to be made in doing so too. So businesses in the UK have got a leading role to play in all of this. Your membership of the UN Global Compact is just one part, I'm sure, of your efforts to set high standards as responsible and sustainable businesses. And it's challenging. And many of you will have been sorely hit by the COVID crisis, both in human terms of loss and suffering, but also by the catastrophic economic downturn. And that's why action to reduce your emissions across your businesses, to reduce their impact on nature, is so vital. COVID has hit us hard, but we've not been defenseless. And even now, vaccines are being manufactured and we'll have access to those next year. But there's no defense against a climate and nature catastrophe. The Arctic melting, not freezing, fires in California and Australia, extreme flooding in Nepal and the Philippines, and of course in South Yorkshire and Cumbria at home in the UK. So we need to act and act fast. So we've got a race to zero for businesses, and we've seen major corporations like Apple and Unilever and Sky commit to net zero emissions, and some businesses commit to climate positive approaches like Microsoft and IKEA. And I think all of you will be at different stages of tackling this as we look to COP26 at the end of next year. But you can double up your impact as a business by acting on your staff pension scheme too. So I think it's good to do 3 things. Look into the scheme that you have for your staff. Does it align with your business mission and values? Does it align with the SDGs? How sustainable is it? Is your pension provider committed to net zero? And if you have a scheme that's managed by trustees separately, then have that same conversation. Secondly, engage your staff. What are their views? What do they want from their pension scheme? And thirdly, ask for the scheme to be better and be determined in taking this forward. And if it's difficult to get change, and if your pension provider isn't willing to change, then look to other providers. And there are many out there who are making this transition. This is your money, and it's also your staff's money invested for years. So it's important it builds the world you want, as well as to get a good return. And this is a great offer to staff as well. Young people nowadays want to work for businesses that have values, that are sustainable, and a sustainable pension is one part of a great offer to recruit and retain staff. And again, if we saw UN Global Compact members here in the UK, but also globally, Large and small, some 16,000 businesses demand more from their pension providers, and then got it, we'd see a huge shift in aligning pension fund investment into building a world we want to retire into and not a world on fire. So on our side, we've produced a simple guide. And if you want to know more about what you can do, please get in touch with us and we can work with you to help you take this forward. So let's make your money matter. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tony. That was really great, very helpful. And now let's move on and hear from Emma. Down to brass tacks, really. I think how do we do it? That's a critical insight. And just again, a reminder: please get us some questions into that Q&A box as we go along. Emma, over to you.
Thanks so much, Steve. So I'd really like to share my views as to whether responsible investment really is the silver bullet to get members engaged with their pension. So the Quiet Room film that Richard showed you certainly suggests that. And I'm going to be using some of the research that Legal & General did last year, as well as the Nest Insight research findings to discuss that point. So one key finding across both sets of the research was that the acronym that we tend to use in the industry, ESG, means almost nothing to members. So if it is to be a silver bullet, it certainly needs a new name. And I think that's why the Make My Money Matter campaign has had such cut through, as it has much more relatable slogans, such as be a net zero hero. So although ESG or even environmental, social and governance issues, or even responsible investing didn't mean much to anyone when we did the research, people really came alive when we discussed the underlying themes in terms that they connected with. So climate change, human exploitation and fair pay. Yet these are everyday concerns and realities in their lives, and they move ESG and pensions from what can appear like an academic exercise to chime in with the issues that scheme members are reading and talking about. And I do think that we need to make our language clear, not something we're renowned for in the pensions industry, to be honest, and not assume that everyone is au fait with all of the latest industry terminology. One great member quote that we heard during the research was, "Decarbonisation, isn't that some form of air freshener?" Well, yes, I suppose it is in a way, but it just shows we've got to be very careful about the language that we use. And the next finding is another really important one for communication purposes. We had to explain to people, just as you saw in that Quiet Room film, that their defined contribution pension pot was invested in companies and in companies that they've heard of. So for over half of those we surveyed, this was actually news to them. And we know most people don't have a lot of time or inclination to think about their pensions. They aren't that interested. And even when they do think about their pension, they'll probably be more focused on what they're going to get rather than how their money is invested. So there's plenty to change here. And I do think that's why it's also important to stress the fact that investing in this way makes financial sense. So you heard this from Richard at the start, and the Nest Insight research showed this was a key point for members. So they reacted more favourably when ESG investing was explained in a positive way. So investing money in green energy, urban regeneration, or vaccine development, for example, rather than avoiding fossil fuels. And one principle that came through loud and clear is that when talking about an environmental or socially responsible approach, people need reassurance that there are no drawbacks, that the essential features that they value in a product, whatever that product is, are uncompromised or even enhanced. So in the context of pensions, people really do need to be told how this approach actually safeguards and grows their money. There's no sacrifice involved from their point of view. And of course, examples of this in other sectors include the work that's been done to reassure people around the performance of, say, eco-cleaning products or electric cars. And both surveys also looked at attitudes across generations and gender. And we saw in our research that this can vary quite a bit. So, these are all generalizations, but the research showed that women care more about social and governance issues than men. Younger pension savers are more likely to want to see that their impact that their money is having at an individual level, whereas older people are more motivated by seeing the collective impact of members of a pension scheme. As I said, generalization, but ideally, communications should be personalized to the issues that people care most about and are most relevant to their circumstances. So, for an example, an effective engagement hook might be telling me that my money has helped to build affordable housing or a renewable energy plant, creating jobs in my local region. Or details about how organisations are dealing with the gender pay gap, for instance. So the survey that we did showed that more than 70% of the female over 40s would actually want to divest on pay practices, probably because they have lived experience of the gender pay gap. So although ESG issues, when explained clearly, really are seen as important, different issues resonate more strongly with different groups. And to really stretch the analogy to a point where it doesn't really work anymore, perhaps there isn't one silver bullet to get people engaged. Maybe it's a series of bullets. That said, overall, most of our survey participants preferred engagement to divestment. So they would prefer us as investment managers to work with companies and change how they act through engagement and through voting on the key issues, rather than just by selling the stock. And I think that's really where the UN Global Compact comes in. So we've been long-standing UNGC supporters, with Legal & General joining the initiative in 2012. And we have been excluding companies flagged as persistent violators of the UNGC from most of our range of funds, from our Future World funds and other core funds. And also, if we can't actually exclude companies from our funds, we vote against those companies in our funds. So that includes big names, Volkswagen, Johnson & Johnson, Wells Fargo. And importantly, we also engage with companies on the list to encourage them to improve. So in 2019, we wrote to 86 companies on the Future World Protection list, including 30 companies that we'd identified as UNGC violators. And we were informing them that we were going to vote against them. And actually, we've seen results as well. So some companies have since made improvements and they've been removed from the sanction list. So Barrick Gold is one of those. And these stories were really interesting to members. They could actually see how being engaged with companies had led to improvement. So I do think that talking to pension scheme members about how their retirement savings are responsibly invested does have the potential to build some new engagement with pension savings and to reach people who may not have been engaged by other communications. And communicating relevant responsible investment stories, I think, could boost trust in pension providers and the industry as a whole, increasing interest in an area of personal finance that's really seen at the very dull end of quite a dull spectrum and being distant from day-to-day life. And perhaps when people understand a bit more, they may even feel a little bit more empowered with their pension. And it may help people to take a first or a second step towards greater financial security in later life. So I do think this really can be a win-win. And I think, final point is that our survey showed that for members, the agenda of racial equality, gender equality, action on climate is absolutely not going anywhere. And we need to make sure, just as the Make My Money campaign does, that members understand how important their pension monies can be in driving positive change. And ultimately, as Steve said at the start, as Tony said as well, there's no point in retiring with a lot of money if you're living on a dead planet. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Emma. Now, I'm afraid as clear and fantastic as that presentation was, you have certainly for me raised quite a few questions. So I'm going to come to you first with a question just to unpack a little bit more, because I had, before you mentioned it, I'd made a note to myself, what about voting? And because I think that's a less understood aspect of this agenda, and I suspect that maybe some in our audience won't know what you meant by voting against a company. Could you unpack that just a little bit more, and what role that plays in as a pension fund?
Yeah, absolutely, Steve. So, as holders, significant shareholders in many companies, Legal & General is the investment manager behind a lot of people's pensions. So as shareholders, we have voting rights. And so we always vote our shares. And so we will vote in favor of climate change resolutions, and we'll vote against resolutions that maybe there isn't enough gender or racial equality on a board. We're worried about excessive executive compensation, or about actions that are really anti, doing something about climate change. So as the ultimate shareholder, Legal & General can vote. Now, what we were explaining to members is that for some of them, they actually look at the list of companies held in their pension, and they might see on that list, an oil company, for instance. So, let's pick on BP, because BP is held in one of our funds. That's our Future World Fund. It's a very ESG focused fund, particularly focused on climate change. And members say, well, why are you holding BP? This doesn't make sense with the fund that we think we're in. And so then we explained to them that we were holding shares in BP, and we were working through voting engagement to get BP to change their policies, so that in effect they moved from being pretty much refusenicks on climate change to having their CEOs' pay aligned to net zero targets, and committing to work with all of their suppliers down the chain to commit to net zero as well. So by actually engaging with the company, voting against them, you can make a lot of change happen. If you don't hold the share at all, it's perhaps harder to influence how companies behave. So it's those two levels, Steve. As an investment manager, you need to vote, and then you need to explain to members what you're doing with your vote.
Just a quick follow-up on this before we move on. Is that you would hold, going back to the BP example, you would hold BP stock in a number of different funds?
Yeah.
So do you vote the same way in every fund? Okay,
every
so
fund,
not just
yeah.
the green fund. So if your pension is sitting with a great company like Legal & General, you can have some confidence. Ideally, you're going to move it into a green fund, but whatever fund you're in, you can at least count on that the votes are going in the right place.
That's it. Yes, yeah, we vote the same way across the board, because it really lessens your impact otherwise. So yeah, that's what we do.
Okay.
Richard.
Oh yeah, sure. Tony, go ahead.
Just to add to what Emma was saying, because Emma, you also divested from Exxon.
We did.
So,
yes.
there's that issue there of, when a company is not willing to engage with the shareholders, is not willing to tackle the climate transition, then what you can do in the extreme is just divest from them. So there's a spectrum of how shareholders can behave, from in the extreme divesting, that sort of deep engagement to try and get a company to transition, or to tackle things like the gender pay gap or CEO remuneration. And at the same time, the investor, the pension fund, can also grow the investments in renewables, in green infrastructure, and so on. So there's a spectrum of actions you can take with regards to companies. It's important to understand that. It's just complex to explain it simply to members. And I think one of the things we'd like to see is see pensions on your phone. So to have an app on your phone where you understand where your pension's invested, the impact it has, and to allow you to indicate your preferences as a pension saver. And I think, Emma, you're piloting Tumelo.
Yes, exactly, Tony. So that is very much that app. So Tumelo, a fabulous little fintech led by Georgia Stewart, and we've been partnering with her. And so members can actually see, which is a revelation for a lot, that their pension scheme, through the funds they invest in, is actually invested in companies, big name companies they've heard of. And this lovely little app shows what are the votes coming up at these companies, and members can indicate how they would like to vote on the key issues. Now, they don't actually own the shares, so they can't vote themselves, but they can indicate how they would like their fund managers to vote. We then take that into account when we vote. So, you know, there's all sorts of things that they can vote on, you know, from, you know, shares like Lululemon down to Sports Direct. You know, should you re-elect Mike Ashley? That got a lot of votes, you know, not to re-elect him basically. And so, you know, you could actually see people getting really engaged. You could see what other people at your company were voting as well. And you got resolution. So you got a message back saying, yep, this is what you voted. This is what other people in your company voted. Your investment managers voted this way, and this is why they did it. So even if the investment manager voted differently from the way the member would have voted, that they saw an explanation as to why. And for most people, that was good.
Can I just jump in here, Steve? Because I would say, you know, it also, particularly possibly in the area of staff engagement, you know, I just moved my pension in order to make sure it was consistent with the aims of the campaign. And I mean, I've been finding the conversations with, you know, the pension companies just gripping. So I mean, I had one about 3 days ago. I'm invested in green cement, fuel cell technology, shipping manufacture, and this amazing, in Germany, there's reverse vending machines where you put in a plastic bottle and you get out a coupon that you can get something free for. So there's also, you know, and I went to another meeting and they were talking about the people who service wind farms, as it were, climb up and do them, and a really successful new company that's giving sustainable local food into British schools. So it's, you know, because I think I started thinking it was all sort of cocoa farms in Kenya or something, but actually it's such an interesting thing. And the idea that I'm in these companies, they're making money for my pension, and every one of them is doing good things for the world, has suddenly made the pensions interesting for me, as well as the fact that I'm glad they're, you know, doing the right thing.
Thank you all on that. Now, it was already, you brought it up, Tony, so maybe just circle back to it, because it was on my list of questions, was about divestment and sort of the, I mean, arguably the nuclear option in any investment scenario. And we in the Global Compact have a similar challenge. If you expel someone, you don't have any more engagement and no more opportunity to change their performance. And it's almost, you know, you're condemning them to continue in their bad ways. I suspect, and you touched on this when you spoke earlier, you wouldn't want Make My Money Matter to be characterized as a divestment campaign.
No, we're definitely not. So I think, as I said, it's this spectrum. So I really like the approach that Emma's described. So, you know, we've got to change the world. So, you know, you've got to vote with your feet to make those changes. And it's difficult. So if you've got engaged shareholders that are saying to a company, right, you know, we want you to transition, then you're going to get a result, hopefully, with that company, or maybe you'll divest. But if you think of the BP story, so BP, you know, has set out that it wants to get to net zero. You know, it's undertaking this transition. So some of its people, those people who finance oil rigs, who manage those projects and the construction of them, those are the very same people who can do the same for wind farms in the North Sea. So as that company changes, you may be able to do this in a way that preserves jobs, capital, skills, and you know, it's a sort of just transition or a productive transition. So we need to be mindful that that's what a lot of companies are going to go through. They're going to adapt and change, and if you can support them to do that and engage with them to do that, but also hold them to account and expect that to happen quickly, that's a more productive approach. But there'll always be some where you might need to divest from because they're not willing, or because the industry, like tobacco, you know, just kills people. So its model is to sell cigarettes. If you invest in it, you're trying to get a return, which means you want them to sell more cigarettes and kill more people. So something like tobacco is just not reformable, and the best thing is just to divest from it.
Perfect. Thank you. Richard, I wanted to come back to you. You've got sure I'm going to mess up the metaphor, so I'll avoid it. But you've already indicated you're involved in so many things: comic relief, your work on SDGs and Project Everyone. Not dissimilar, I think, to your average sustainability director in a company who's trying to sort out, you know, climate change and water use and waste and living wages and inclusivity and D&I. There's so many issues. How did this even get on your radar? You mentioned the TED Talk, but I mean, you saw a TED Talk, but of all the things you could be working on, give us a sense of, you know, why this made it onto your top priorities to invest in your time, and why should others, you know, do the same?
Well, look, I mean, one is just the size of the pot. I mean, for all the campaigning we did in the Live 8 concerts, I think, I mean, debt cancellation was amazing, but I think we got 14 billion in terms of the new contributions by governments. And that's just not the kind of numbers that are going to transform the world. Whereas actually this kind of investment is much larger figures. So, you know, I've kept on making little films for the UN saying, let's turn the billions into trillions. And I didn't know how. It just rhymes. So I was really attracted by the size of it. But also, I think it's very much the mood of the times. This idea of what can I actually do? You know, my kids are slightly unwilling charitable givers. You know, they really are looking at the, you know, the food they buy, the clothes they buy, whether or not they fly. You know, this idea that how we operate day to day is absolutely crucial, rather than once a year or once a month giving £10. And I just thought, wow, here's a whole new thing that I can tell anybody who's saying, is it worth recycling? Should I genuinely, you know, use my washing machine on a different cycle? You know, and you say, well, actually, here's a whopping great big thing. So I just thought it was a cracking story. I mean, I do. I think that if you go to people in your company and you say, these are the things we're doing, they're very hard, we're restructuring and everything like that. But by the way, we're going to move our pension. Our pension's going to do extraordinary things for all this range of companies. The chief financial officer will sort it. Sometimes it's complicated, but I've had friends who've done it in a phone call. So I just think that it's a new story. It's a story that's in tune with the times, and it could be huge. So those are the things that, you know, attracted me to it, rather than, as it were, you know, organizing an event to raise £100,000 that needs 10 celebrities in it. This doesn't need any. The chief financial officer is the celebrity in this gig.
Yeah, a huge prize and very little effort required to win it. So we should pile in. Now maybe let's just circle back to the effort, and what does it take? So this one might be for you, Emma, but happy obviously for Tony and Richard to weigh in. But just many pensions are managed by an independent trustee committee, and there's an explicit separation from the management of the company and the management of the pension fund. Is that a real barrier that we should allow to impede action in this area? And so a pension fund, a company fund that is not currently sustainable, what are the practical steps? Who do you phone to get it done, you know, right away?
I love that question. Who do you phone? It's not the Ghostbusters.
Definitely not Ghostbusters or even Pension Busters this time. I think it's, you know, you would go to your pension manager if there's a pension manager in your organization. And, you know, there are pensions, as you rightly say, Steve, that are run by a board of trustees. So, you know, if you know that, then do go to the trustees. The trustees have got the fiduciary duty to invest the money. So they are the people who will be making the decisions in that scenario. You can go through HR as well. HR are normally involved in the pensions decision. And then, you know, if all else fails, just have a look at the range of options that the pension that you've got offers you. I saw some things on the chat about, you know, is there an ethical option, you know, all of that kind of thing. So, you know, potentially you could even select a fund from those funds that exist at the moment that you could invest in. But I would personally start at the top, you know, start with either pension manager, HR people, or the board of trustees, if there is a board of trustees. And, you know, you can search up information on where your pension actually is, and then get in contact with that organisation. So that could be a provider like Legal and General or Aviva. You know, there's all sorts of ways, I think, that you can find out where your pension is. Then most people are in the default fund. So that's the fund that you get automatically enrolled into when you're enrolled into a pension. And that fund may or may not have, you know, lots of, you know, good ESG credentials. So that's certainly worth looking into how that fund is invested. And I did see that on one of the chats they were saying, oh, Legal and General haven't signed up to Make My Money Matter. Watch this space is all I can say.
I mean, it is a sort of shocker, isn't it, Steve, that basically you're going to the supermarket of investment and you don't get to see what's in the bag. You know, so it would be me getting back and finding out it's all oysters and broccoli, you know, stuff I don't want. It's just, and yet the delight in getting the things that you do want, and the companies that are behaving best on gender and diversity and climate and all of these issues, it's such a rich box to open.
Well, and I'm thinking just the counterfactual, the fact that there is a default. What possible justification could any company have for not switching the default to the green fund? I mean, that just seems like the easiest possible win. Let's start there. If one of your employees has got special values and they want to be in the not green fund, well, then I suppose they can always switch out of it. But that just seems like that shocked me, which now is going to lead me on to a question that I also had noted, and I see Roger has posted it, and I think we've given government a free pass so far in this conversation, and I'd be really interested in hearing what is Make My Money Matter doing to get the government on side in this. I think there's loads of discussion underway already around pensions reform, and because there's so many problem areas there before we even get close to the sustainability of pensions. What are you doing there? And is there, again, is there a call to action to be made for us to do something as well?
No, so
you know the answer. Can I just say I was in fact just on a government call today, and it's certainly high on their agenda. That's all I'll say. I mean, there's a lot of discussion. They have to be responsible. You know how complex government is, but that's been a surprise to me that it's, you know, particularly with the UK having COP at the end of next year, setting an example, trying to do the right thing. I think the level of government engagement is high. I mean, Tony, you know the pros and possibly cons of what they're up to.
No, that's right, Richard. And, you know, this is an area where government is providing a lot of leadership, hosting the COP, but also hosting the G7 are big opportunities for the government to set out a really positive agenda on climate. On the pensions side, the pensions minister has over the past few years quite radically transformed the kind of regulations that pension funds are sort of managed under. So, you know, requiring pension funds to undertake ESG and publish what they're doing on that. Just now we've had an agreement for reporting against TCFD, the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. I think government will consult on pension funds reporting on their projected warming to 2050. So, you know, if we're trying to get these funds to reduce emissions to align with 1.5 degrees, at the moment, most pension funds are in a 3 to 4 degree kind of world if you project the impact of the emissions in the future. So these are all fantastic reforms that government's pushed. And ultimately, because this is a thing, you can't judge whether you're in a good pension fund or not. It's so hard to understand what it looks like. And, you know, as in a simple way, you know, for myself, you know, if I know a pension fund is committed to align their emissions to net zero, then that's going to make me feel good about that pension fund. And if it isn't, then I'm going to be worried. But the benchmarks, it's really difficult to know. So I think all that government effort will soon allow us to see all this data. You know, are you in a 3 degrees pension fund? are you in one that doesn't really take ESG seriously, that isn't really bothered about engaging with companies? And if you're in a pension fund like that, you just need to tell them, you know, can you do better? And if not, just get out of it and go to someone else. So that's great. We, with others, with the World Wildlife Fund, Client Earth and others, we tried to persuade government to amend the pensions bill just recently to include a clause that would require pension funds to implement strategies aligned to net zero. So all this reporting is one thing, but it doesn't require pension funds to do anything about that. What will happen then, there'll be sort of, you know, reputational risks, there'll be member demands for action, but, you know, the action isn't being required right now. And the worry we all have is what's going to happen in these next 10 years? How can we go faster on reducing emissions? And it will take a few years to report. It'll take a while for pressure to build. It's just, for me, it's just too long. So we asked for an amendment and government rejected it. And they said the amendment, two things really. One, the amendment would force trustees who are independent to constrain their investment strategies in a way that wasn't appropriate for government to be so directive. Government was also worried that some trustees might just divest too quickly in order to avoid legal penalties and then not engage enough with oil and gas companies. I mean, these are valid concerns, but the real struggle is to find a way to work with government to drive the pace much faster than it is now. You know, we're getting voluntary commitments from Nest and Aviva and BT and local government schemes. And Emma's given us a hint that something might happen in the future. This is fantastic. But, you know, I sort of think by April next year, maybe we'll get 500 billion in the UK aligned with net zero. But actually there's 3 trillion invested from UK pension schemes. We've got to go much, much faster. So the thing with government then is, you know, we want to work with government to work out how do we go faster. I hope we'll accelerate with COP26 next year, but I just worry it won't be fast enough.
I mean, but that's one of the things about today, isn't it, Tony, which is that, you know, what we're trying to do is everything at the same time. You know, when I first went to talk to Mark Carney, he said, you know, the evaluation systems aren't there, the government thing isn't quite there, but if you wait, as it were, it's like both people not ringing when you want a second date. It's not going to work. So, you know, one of the ways this will happen is a huge number of individuals and a huge number of companies starting to make the changes themselves. And that will actually, you know, one, give the government confidence, but two, accelerate it. So as with all things, particularly climate, but actually, you know, gender and race related, it's our responsibility. We shouldn't all be waiting and saying, well, let's see what the law tells us. Because as individuals and as people who run businesses, this is your opportunity to step forward, you know, and it should be a source of pride to anyone after today who decides to, you know, make that call, change their pension, do the right thing.
We are unfortunately out of time, and I'm very disappointed. I have quite a few more questions, and we have more in the boxes, but they're going to have to wait for another day. Maybe just quickly, Rob, well, while I'm saying thank you, Rob, if you could put the contact details slide up on the screen so that if anyone wants more information about Make My Money Matter, there's a website and an email address. You can also reach out to Global Compact. We think this is a really important initiative. So I'm going to perhaps call to action. Everyone, if you don't know what your pension is invested in right now, if you don't know if you're in an ethical, green, sustainable fund, make the call. Find out where it's at and get it somewhere that's sustainable. If you are responsible for a pension fund in a company, if you're in a company, talk to the right people, make the call, call the HR department, call the CFO, find out where your pension, what are the rules governing it? Is it sustainable? Is it aligned with net zero? If it isn't, the good people at Make My Money Matter can help correct that situation. And I think we've heard just how important it is that we make this easy step to make things better. My final words are, this is, as I said at the beginning, the penultimate event in our climate forum. In half an hour, we have a fantastic session lined up, a debate on carbon offsetting. And anyone involved in net zero, this is something you've obviously got to understand. Most companies are going to have to incorporate some element of carbon offsetting into their net zero plan, and it's really critical that you understand just what exactly that means. And we're going to have two fantastic panels battling it out to try and reach some answers on that. Richard, thank you so much for so generously giving of your time. Likewise, Tony and Emma, it's been a real pleasure having this conversation, and I hope we can do it again sometime soon. Thank you all. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Great to see you.
Thank you.